From obscure beginnings as a warrior tribe of nomadic horsemen, the Ottoman Empire rose to become the most powerful force in the Islamic world. With its magnificent capital, Istanbul, here on the European shores of the Bosphorus, it stood as a self-styled caliphate whose territories rivaled those of ancient Rome. This was an empire founded on military conquest, and the Ottomans had a mastery of Europe in their sight. For 500 years, the battle raged back and forth as the Ottomans tried to establish a permanent presence in Eastern Europe. It's a legacy that continues to haunt these contested lands to this day. For all its grandeur and might, little is known about the Ottoman Empire's earliest beginnings. But legend tells us something of its purpose. And the legend goes something like this. Osman, a young Turkoman tribal warrior living somewhere in northwest Anatolia, traveled to the home of Edirne, a highly regarded religious man in the area. Osman knew Edirne and he admired his teachings. He also had his eye on the old man's daughter. Edirne, for his part, wasn't quite so enamored of his prospective son-in-law. But Osman persevered, he continued his visits, and then one night, something extraordinary happened. Osman dreamed he saw the moon rise up from the holy man's chest as he lay sleeping. It crossed the sky and it set in Osman's own chest. Then a tree sprouted from Osman's navel. It grew large and strong, and its branches spread across the entire sky, casting a cooling shade on all the land. Streams of fresh water rushed down from the mountains, and people drank from them. Osman immediately woke up Edirne and told him his dream, which the old man interpreted as a divine prophecy, foretelling a glorious future for Osman and the expansion of his people. A dream of empire, no less. Well, the stuff of legend, probably. But Osman, the Turkoman warrior, was a real historical figure and is recognized as the founder of the Ottoman dynasty. The word Ottoman actually means the people of Osman, and the name Osman means bone cruncher, a rather ominous portent for the future. Oh, in case you're wondering, yes, he did get the girl. He married her.
This legend is rooted in Central Asian mythology. This is an example of the Ottoman Turks' pre-Islamic origins. The tree story is one of several, which are justifications for expansion and rule, and to some extent you might even say universal domination. The idea that the Turks are destined to rule the world.
Exploiting their legendary skills as warrior horsemen, the people of Osman spread out across northwestern Anatolia. They ransacked towns and villages, both Byzantine and Muslim, acquiring more territory, booty, and recruits. But it wasn't until they captured the Byzantine town of Bursa in 1326 that their status would change, setting them on a course for empire. Bursa was little more than an outpost on the edges of the dwindling Byzantine Empire. Osman had his eye on the city for some time, but it wasn't until his son Orhan came to power that the Ottomans succeeded in taking it. Known today as Bursa, the city is the fourth largest in Turkey and one of the country's historical gems. But for the Ottomans of the early 14th century, it represented not the past, but the future.
Bursa was important. When they took control of it, it sort of altered the whole of their their society. They suddenly became rulers of a significant town for the first time.
The Ottomans renamed the city Bursa, and they made it their capital. So suddenly we see them abandoning a tribal way of life and adopting an urban lifestyle. And they also acquire imperial ambitions, a dream of empire which they realize by rebuilding the city in their own image. It's like their calling card. They say, we've arrived, we're here to stay, and we mean business. And it's really a quite dramatic transformation, and it happens very quickly. Considered by many to be the true heart of the Ottoman Empire, Bursa is filled with impressive monuments from the early Ottoman period. Dominating the city is the Grand Ulu Cami, or Great Mosque. Built at the end of the 14th century, its scale and beauty expresses perfectly the empire's lofty ambitions. But it is perhaps the older Yildirim Beyazid Mosque complex, built about 60 years after the city's conquest, that tells us more about the Ottomans' aims in those nascent days of empire. Set just outside the city centre, with its own hospital, school, bathhouse and kitchen, it was the Ottomans' first mosque complex, built to attract a community that could be taxed and thereby generate revenue. Stepping inside this mosque, one is immediately struck by the grandeur of the interior, which is, of course, precisely what was intended. This is a power statement. But one also gets the impression that it's not very mosque-like. It's a bit like a church, if that's not too sacrilegious. It has a transept, except the transept is towards the door. And I think probably the early architects and artisans and builders who were responsible for this building, they probably came from Byzantium themselves. And that, of course, was the benchmark that the Ottomans were pitching themselves against. Impressive as it was, Bursa couldn't compare with the legendary capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, located 56 miles to the north. Spread out along the European side of the Bosphorus, Constantinople sat at the crossroads of ancient trade routes between east and west, which made the city immensely powerful and wealthy. Known today as Istanbul, Constantinople was once the epicenter of the Eastern Roman Empire and the Orthodox Christian Church.
The Byzantine Empire had shrunk and was no longer powerful, but it had this cultural significance. It had been there since the first expansion of Islam. It had resisted attack by the early Muslim Arabs successfully. It had resisted attacks over centuries. It loomed hugely in the imagination and the political sort of landscape of the Ottomans and indeed of all the Muslims of the Middle East.
By the mid-14th century, the Byzantine Empire was embroiled in a power struggle between two claimants to the throne. John VI Kantakouzenos, a close confidant of the previous emperor, and John V Palaiologos, the 20-year-old hereditary heir to the throne. Kantakouzenos, aware of the Ottomans' formidable reputation as warriors, invited Orhan's forces to help him suppress the rebellion. So, in 1352, an Ottoman force made its way to the Dardanelles Straits, a narrow strip of water separating Anatolia from the Gallipoli Peninsula on the mainland of southeastern Europe. Born of desperation, the Byzantine king's decision was to have dire consequences, not only for the future of Byzantium, but also the Balkans. The back door to Europe had been literally flung open to Ottoman expansion, and the pickings were rich. Landing on the European side of the Straits, Orhan's forces marched into Thrace, where they roundly defeated the Byzantine rebels. This was the first major battle the Ottomans would fight and win on European soil. Cantacazinus's reign was secured, but any expectations he might have had about Orhan's armies returning from whence they came were quickly dispelled.
According to Islamic law, once some land has been conquered by Islam, it becomes part of the Islamic world. It was believed the Islamic world was destined really to sweep over the whole of the earth. And so there could only ever be an advance in this. And once the flag had been planted in a piece of land, it was theirs and it was non-negotiable.
Orhan does seem to have used this idea that you can't abandon territory which has once been conquered by Muslims. So he can't give back this little fortress. Gives them the base. The Byzantines are not strong enough to take it back by force, and from there they can raid.
Ottoman forces swept northwards across Thrace with breathtaking speed. Bypassing Constantinople itself, they pushed deeper into Europe, reaching the city of Adrianopolis near the Bulgarian border in little more than a decade.
Under late Byzantine rule, the Balkans was a chaotic collection of little kingdoms, very fragmented, and ruled by Christian feudal overlords who oppressed their peasantry very heavily.
You could say, really, it was absolutely ripe for picking. There had been fighting between the Byzantines, the Bulgarians, the Serbs, various other people. The place was in a mess.
It really provided an opportunity for the Ottomans to step in and actually to provide something a little bit better.
In some places they were accepted, in some places they were even welcomed. It's almost like a sense of relief. Finally, the locals might be saying, we've got a government that can govern.
Named after the Roman Emperor Hadrian, Adrianopolis was a significant conquest for the Ottomans. It was perfectly positioned to launch far-reaching campaigns into Europe. By the time of its capture, Orhan had died, and his more than capable son Murad had come to power. Murad was an accomplished military leader who understood the city's strategic potential. So he changed its name to the Turkish Edirne and began to transform it into a grand European capital for his empire. The Ottomans celebrated their entry into Europe with a dazzling display of architectural magnificence. But for all that, Edirne was first and foremost a military centre. It's a legacy that is still very much alive to this day. Edirne lays claim to the longest continually running, state-sanctioned sports competition in the world, the annual Turkish Oil Wrestling tournament. Oil wrestling is the national sport of Turkey, and its history goes back a long way. But the competitions at Edirne began in the 14th century when the Ottoman Army came to town. Turkish historian Soner Tursun is a fan of the event, and he's invited me to watch a practice match between two of this year's strongest contenders. Watching these gentlemen writhing around as we are, tell me something about the rules.
The rules are different from modern wrestling. If the belly of a wrestler is exposed to sun, then the wrestling is over. Alternatively, if a wrestler grabs the other one into the air and walks 3 steps, then the wrestling is over too.
Whoa, so that was a lift, yeah?
Yeah, good lift, but he walked for 2 paces.
Ah, right. He's got to take 3.
Yes.
According to legend, oil wrestling came to Edirne in the 14th century when a group of Ottoman soldiers began to wrestle nearby. 2 of the soldiers were so evenly matched that they wrestled through the night until they both died of exhaustion. To honour them, a wrestling competition has taken place in Edirne ever since. Oily men in leather breeches. Where does that come from, Soner?
It comes from Central Asia. It was a kind of preparation for war. So every Turkish warrior was a wrestler at the same time.
The Ottoman army is famous for being very well organized and structured. How were the forces recruited?
The real power of the Ottoman army was the janissary, who formed at most 10% of the army. Those janissaries were not Turks. They were taken from Christian families in Balkans. Their children were taken as a kind of tax.
And these children were forcibly removed from their families, I understand it, which seems a terribly sort of harsh position.
In the beginning, it was. But in time, as families saw that their children could rise to the highest positions, most of the families gave their children voluntarily.
So that's rather extraordinary that some of the highest offices in the land were occupied by non-Turks and originally people who were Christians.
Yes, but of course they learned Turkish traditions and of course they became good Muslims. And once they were taken from families and trained, they were only loyal to the Sultan.
So that's game over, is it?
Yes.
Congratulations. Great battle, Titans. Very spectacular.
Denemek ister misiniz?
Would you like to try?
Oh, I think I need to bulk up a bit before I take you on, but I'll be back. In the latter half of the 14th century, the Ottoman army was probably the most efficient and formidable fighting force in the Western world. With professional, salaried troops at its core, each with a specific role to play, it was a very modern army compared to its European rivals. Each division was immediately recognizable by its colorful uniforms and insignia, feathers, plumes, that kind of thing. And it played a very specific role in the Ottoman war machine. Now, these rather fearsome bunch of desperados behind me, they're from the Balkasir Karesi cavalry enactment group, and they're going to show me exactly how all of this fitted together. Gentlemen, are you ready? I'm out of here. At its core were the Janissaries, that elite force of infantrymen drawn from Balkan children. A salaried force loyal to the Sultan, the Janissaries were highly trained fighters likened to the Roman Praetorian Guards. Their reputation for ferocious charges was unrivaled. Just as elite were the Sipahis and the Sultan's own Kapikulu Sipahis cavalry. They were the main attacking force of the army, leading charges from the front and performing pincer-like attacks from the flanks. Then there were the irregular forces. Called up in times of war, they were unsalaried and unpredictable. The Bashibazouks were foot soldiers, motivated primarily by the promise of booty. The word Bashibazouk means damaged head in Turkish, a reference to their complete lack of discipline and reckless courage in battle. Last but not least were the Akinji, a light cavalry used for surprise attacks and lightning raids on the enemy before the battle had even begun. Often drawn from religiously motivated warriors, the Akinjis were the jihadis of their day. Known as the Crazies because of their suicidally courageous tactics, they were respected for their horsemanship and skilled use of weaponry. To give you a better idea of their capabilities, these watermelons represent the heads of their enemy. These were the fighting divisions, but the Ottomans fielded huge armies, 100 to 150,000 men, and they all had to be provided for. So there was a huge contingent of camp followers, the people who put up the tents and carried them, the people who cooked for the army, water bearers, medical supplies, the people who carried the weapons. And then there were the engineers who made the roads and put bridges over the rivers ahead. There was even a marching band. An Ottoman army on the move was a huge logistical exercise. Now, where did everybody go? With his well-organized army, Murad marched deeper into the Balkans, sweeping eastward to the shores of the Black Sea, westward to the frontiers of Greece and Macedonia, and northward into Bulgaria, taking the important trading center of Plovdiv in 1364. Ottoman expansion seemed unstoppable, but there was one obstacle looming on their horizon: Serbia. At its height, the Serbian Empire stretched from the southern border of Hungary, down the Adriatic coast, and deep into Macedonia and Greece.
Serbia was one of the major powers of the Orthodox Christian Balkans. But it always seemed to be on the verge of taking over from the Byzantine, from the Roman Empire, becoming the new Rome, which would defend the Orthodox faith and Orthodox civilization. It didn't happen. And why didn't it happen? It's those rotten Turks. They came and spoiled it all.
Murad's forces defeated Serbian resistance in Macedonia, making vassals of the local princes, before pushing into the Serbian heartland, taking the city of Nice in 1385. As the Ottomans closed in, what remained of the once great Serbian Empire was being held together by a regional prince, Lazar Eribeljevic. Prince Lazar managed to repel Ottoman advances for a time, but Murad's forces launched a devastating offensive, climaxing here in fields just outside of Pristina, in what was then the Serbian province of Kosovo. The Battle of Kosovo took place in 1389, and it was fought here at Kosovo Polje, Kosovo Fields. It was an epic struggle between two mighty armies that acquired a legendary status in the hearts and minds of the Serbian people. Now, shortly before the battle, Prince Lazar issued a famous proclamation or curse on anyone who didn't turn up to defend the homeland against the infidel. And it goes like this: whoever is a Serb, of Serb birth, of Serb blood, of Serb heritage, and comes not to fight at Kosovo, may he never have progeny born of love, neither son nor daughter. And may nothing sown by his hand ever grow, neither red wine nor white wheat. And may he be forever dying in filth, as long as his children may live. Pretty potent stuff. On June the 15th, an Ottoman force of some 25,000 men under the command of Murad himself clashed head-on with a Serbian force of about 16,000 under the leadership of Prince Lazar. The Serbs put up a good fight, but they were ultimately no match for the superior numbers and discipline of the Ottoman army. As the battle turned against the Serbs, legend holds that one of their noblemen, a knight named Milos Obilic, pretended to desert to the Turkish side. When he was brought before Sultan Murad, he pulled out a hidden dagger and slew him, slashing him from belly to neck. The story continues when the Sultan's son, Bayezid, who was also at the battle, learned of his father's murder. He sent for his brother Jakob, but gave orders that he not be informed of what had happened. When Jakob arrived from the battlefield, his father's death was revealed to him. But what he didn't realize was that his brother Bayezid had arranged for him to be strangled to death, leaving Bayezid as the sole heir to the Ottoman throne. It was a neat, if cynical, trick on Bayezid's part, but one that set a dangerous precedent for institutionalized fratricide amongst future claimants to the Sultanate. Murat was buried at Kosovo Field. This is his tomb. The Ottomans had lost their Sultan, but the Serbs, they too had lost their leader. Prince Lazar was also killed on the field of battle, and both sides had suffered enormous casualties. One can't really say it was a victory for the Ottomans, and it certainly wasn't a victory for the Serbs, because there is a difference. The Ottomans had plenty of soldiers deployed elsewhere in the empire, but for the Serbs, it was an entire generation of fighting men cut short, wiped out. They would never make a recovery. For the Ottomans, it was but a temporary setback in an otherwise relentless advance through the Balkans.
The Battle of Kosovo would cast a long shadow over Serbian memory. This is going to be carried forward for hundreds of years. That one day and extinction of Serbia's hopes of a national identity is not going to be forgotten.
The Battle of Kosovo lives on in the collective memory of Serbs today. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, hundreds of Serbs pour into Kosovo, now an independent and largely Muslim republic, to commemorate their history at the Gazi Mestan, or Heroes Monument, situated here near the site of the battle. As part of the ceremony, representatives of the Serbian Orthodox Christian Church perform Mass in front of the monument, on which is inscribed Prince Lazar's famous curse.
Battle of this place between Serbian and Ottoman Empire is very important in our history.
Is this the first time you've come here?
Yes,
Yeah.
first, and I plan to
Come again.
come again, yes.
You're a young person. When you go to school, do you learn about this in your history lessons?
Of course. This is part of history that every child have to know. That is from Serbia and from Balkan. That
Yeah.
was a big battle. And we all know about that. And we love our history. We love Kosovo. Kosovo is Serbia. Yes, it
So
really is.
The Battle of Kosovo has long been a potent symbol for Serbian nationalism, and the ceremony has, in recent times, been used to promote the restoration of Serbian sovereignty over Kosovo. But the battle was perhaps most controversially invoked by Slobodan Milosevic in 1989, when he gave a speech at the site calling for Serbian unity in the face of a rapidly disintegrating Yugoslavia.
Na ovom mestu u srcu Srbije, na polju Kosovu, pre 6 vekova, pre punih 600 godina, dogodila se jedna od najvećih bitaka onoga doba.
The Great Battle of Kosovo was a massive defeat for the Serbian people. And put simply, it was followed by centuries of foreign occupation and oppression.
Nesloga I izdaja na Kosovu pratit će dalje srpski narod kao zla kob kroz čitavu njegovu istoriju.
Their history has given them what can really be called a sense of persecution. You know, everybody's against us. And this was built upon and it festered, and then it was used by politicians. It did have a roots in reality. So, it's both justified and understandable and tragic.
6 vekova kasnije, danas, opet smo u bitkama I pred bitkama. One nisu oružane, mada I takve još nisu isključene.
Obilić is going to re-emerge, and the curse of Lazar is going to re-emerge with Slobodan Milosevic in the 1990s and the Bosnian genocide.
Neka večno živi uspomena na kosovsko junaštvo.
In the 14th century, as in the 20th, the defeat of Serbia was portrayed in the starkest of terms. It was good versus evil, Christian against Muslim. The reality, however, was much more complicated.
The Ottomans actually improved life for Christian peasants.
The local Christian population in the towns and certainly in the countryside, they were left alone.
They were not encouraged to convert. In fact, they were encouraged not to convert in a way, because conversion to Islam actually brought lower taxes to the Ottoman treasury.
Most of the Orthodox Church structure accepted the new political reality and worked with it.
The patriarch would be in charge of the Orthodox Christians, the Jews and the Muslims. And as long as you paid your taxes, you are all effectively the flock, the Sultan's flock. You are all protected people. There were limitations on what you could do. For example, permission to build churches was limited. You couldn't ring a church bell.
For a few centuries, you might have to give one of your numerous children better chance of survival if he's taken by the Sultan to become a janissary, actually.
There probably were times of the year during Islamic festivals and so on when it was probably best to keep your head down a bit, but they were not ghettoized in a kind of formal way, and you did not have pogroms in the way that you did in Western Europe.
Despite a policy of religious tolerance in the Ottoman Balkans, many Christians did convert to Islam. And one of the most popular engines of conversion were the dervish orders. Much like the Christian missionaries, the dervishes accompanied the Ottoman army on their Balkan campaigns and remained after the fighting was over to help establish a peaceful transition. Offering a more mystical form of Islam, dervishes were very popular and continued to thrive in pockets of the Balkans. Here in the Kosovan town of Prizren, dervishes from the Rufai sect practiced their faith in the time-honored way, offering us a glimpse into religious life during the Ottoman period. Today, they will be performing an annual piercing ceremony at their lodge. But before it begins, Sejamali Shehu, the lodge leader's son, is going to help me understand a bit more about their faith. So this functions like a mosque, this space?
Yes, of course, because it's a mihrab here.
Yes.
He orients us to the Mecca.
All right, so this is where this ceremony will take place.
Yes.
So tell me something about the actual ceremony and what's going to happen.
Today's ceremony calls in our religion Sultan Nevruz.
Yes.
It means the birthday of Hazrat Imam Ali.
And he was the cousin, the nephew of the Prophet.
Yes.
And his son-in-law.
Yes.
Right. These look some very extraordinarily sharp instruments.
Yeah.
Tell me about what they are and how you use them.
First, they are the small zarfs.
Right.
They called zarf.
Zarf, yeah.
Yes. These zarfs are piercings for children.
And what part of the body do you pierce?
In chickens.
Right.
From this side, they put sheikh,
Yeah.
and out on this side.
Really?
Yes. And they stay like this.
Yeah, right. This must be extremely painful.
No, it's not painful. We don't have pain, just because when you know for who you are doing and why you are doing, you don't feel nothing.
What age were you when you did this ceremony for the first time?
First time I was when I was 6.
Really? That
Yes.
young? Gosh. And how do you feel after you perform this ritual? It must be an extraordinary experience.
I feel really powerful, really good feelings, really
Yes.
happy.
Right.
Because I'm doing with love,
Yes.
and this is it.
The ceremony begins with the arrival of the lodge's spiritual leader, Sheikh Shahu. As the devotees sing and dance, the sheikh decides when the time is right for the piercings to start. There is no set order to the proceedings. Sheikh Shahu spontaneously chooses those he feels are ready. Blessing the implements with his lips, he begins. The Rufai piercing ritual originated centuries ago with the order's founder, Pir Sejid Ahmed Rufai. He wanted to demonstrate the miracle of God's power by showing that one could overcome pain through faith and devotion to God. You know, this ritual in the context of the dervish community, it's all about devotion to Allah. But I can see how this kind of mystical Islam might have also had an appeal to Christian communities in the Balkans as well. And there's that sort of element of flagellation, self-mortification, that kind of thing, which you find in the Christian church. And also maybe even ties in with earlier, pagan beliefs as well. So I can see the appeal when the Ottomans first came into this area. This might have been picked up on by local communities as well. There may have been a degree of religious harmony in the Ottoman Balkans, but the Battle of Kosovo raised alarm bells across many of the Latin Christian nations in Central Europe, in particular Hungary. With Buda, part of today's Budapest, as its capital, 14th century Hungary was one of Europe's largest and most powerful kingdoms. Controlling much of present-day Austria, the Czech Republic, Croatia and Romania, Hungary was acutely aware of the Ottoman menace now threatening its southern borders.
The medieval kingdom of Hungary was huge. It was also emphatically Catholic Christian. Hungary is the frontier between Catholic, that is Latin, Christendom, and the Orthodox world. The Hungarian state, a bit like the Serbs, they expected to become the dominant power of this very large region. All of a sudden, there's another dominant power that seems to have come from nowhere. So we've got to stop them.
Hungary was regarded by the Pope as an eastern bulwark of Latin Christianity. So Hungary's King Sigismund, based in his palace here in Buda Castle, campaigned vigorously for a united front against the Ottomans and managed to persuade Pope Boniface IX to back a new crusade. Despite enthusiastic support from across Europe, it would turn out to be the last of the big crusades and end in appalling disaster. In a rare moment of European unity, an alliance of Crusader knights from France, Burgundy, Germany, gathered here in the castle of Buda in the summer of 1396 to join forces with King Sigismund's Hungarian army. King Sigismund himself was so enthused by the assembled host that he rose excitedly. Their lances could have upheld the sky. In July of that year, the Crusader army headed south along the Danube River towards the Balkans, where they would join up with local forces to rout the Muslim invader from Europe once and for all. Then it was on to the Holy Land to liberate Jerusalem from the sword of Islam. Well, that was the plan anyway.
The Crusaders say it's going to be easy and we can fight Turks. They don't hardly wear any armour and they just shoot with feeble little bows and their blood is thin, which is why they won't come into close contact with us red-blooded Frenchmen, and we can go out there with our full armours and our lovely big horses and great big swords, and we're going to all come gloriously home again and the ladies are going to love us.
The Crusaders' chosen course, the Danube, was a hugely important waterway and trade route that flowed from southern Germany past Vienna and Budapest, and down through the heart of the Balkans to the Black Sea. And it formed a natural border between Serbia, Bulgaria, and the Romanian province of Wallachia. By the 14th century, the river had become the front line in a war between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire that would last for years to come. Whoever held the Danube held the advantage. The Ottomans occupied a number of fortified positions along the Danube River, which the Crusader army was keen on liberating. The most important of these was the garrison town of Nicopolis, which lay downstream from here, a few hundred kilometers through these gorges. And in order to get there, they had to pass through treacherous enemy territory with the threat of ambush at every bend in the river. The Crusaders made good progress, and everything seemed to be going to plan until they entered northwest Bulgaria, where the local population were Orthodox Christians. Here, the French and the Burgundian troops behaved appallingly. Basically, they ran amok, laying waste to Ottoman-held towns and villages and slaughtering the Christians as well as the Turks. This really angered the local Wallachian and Bulgarian militias, which in turn upset King Sigismund. He'd been relying on them for support. Worryingly, it revealed serious divisions in the Crusader camp before they'd even engaged the Ottomans in a major battle. The Crusaders persevered, reaching Nicopolis, today's Nicopol, in September of 1396. These days, Nicopol is a sleepy Bulgarian town with a sizable Muslim minority. But in the 14th century, it was an important Ottoman stronghold on the fringes of their empire. Sultan Bayezid had fortified the town well, manning it with both Ottoman troops and Orthodox Christian vassals. But he and the bulk of his army had yet to reach the city before the Crusaders arrived. Sigismund's forces laid siege to Nicopol's sturdy fortifications, including its citadel, which stood here on a bluff overlooking the river. But they failed to take the town before the Sultan turned up with his reinforcements. The ensuing battle would be a humiliating disaster for the Crusaders on many levels.
The Crusaders had been misbehaving themselves, not just with the raping and pillaging, but having a fair number of whores and prostitutes with the army, feasting and carousing and generally not behaving like a sort of pious Christian army. They were caught with their trousers down, in many cases, literally.
King Sigismund tried to organize some kind of plan of attack. He suggested that his own troops, who were experienced at fighting the Ottomans, should lead the order of battle with the French following. But the French weren't having any of that. They weren't going to follow some Hungarian peasants into battle, so they charged off in their rather drunken stupor, and instead of meeting their great, glorious battle with the Sultan, they met their deaths.
The Burgundians, they wanted to just get in there and get stuck in, because this is the way they fought. Massive cavalry charge, busting through the enemy. They were quite convinced they could just push aside anything. Well, in actual fact, they did. They pushed aside the first line of defence. They smashed into and through the second line of defence. They're exhausted. They're absolutely exhausted. And then all of a sudden, there's another Turkish army charging downhill against a bunch of sweaty, exhausted, thirsty, and very often wounded or injured men in heavy armour. And there was a certain amount of fighting, but they just bowled the Burgundians over.
Angered by the Crusaders' slaughter of Ottoman prisoners in the lead-up to the battle, Bayezid ordered his own captives beheaded. The resulting bloodbath was reported to be so violent that the Sultan himself became sickened and stopped the massacre halfway through.
It was picked up by the Christian propagandists portraying the Muslims as ruthless barbarians who slaughter their prisoners, and on the other side, the propagandists saying precisely the same thing about the Christians because they had already slaughtered many of their prisoners just before the battle started. So this is feeding into the mythology of fear, mistrust, and eventually hate on both sides.
For Christian Europe, the defeat of the Crusader army at Nicopolis was more than just a military disaster and a humiliation. It put religion at the center of the conflict. Stories of Sultan Bayezid's merciless massacre of prisoners of war spread across the continent like wildfire. The Ottomans were not just a foreign invading army, they were evil incarnate, and their sultan, the Antichrist. By the end of the 14th century, Ottoman control of the Bulgarian Danube was secure. But Bayezid had a much bigger prize in his sights, one that he was in the process of capturing before the Crusaders of Nicopolis distracted him. Known as the Red Apple, it was the capital of Eastern Christendom itself, Constantinople. Surrounded on all sides by Ottoman territory, it was only a matter of time before the famed city would fall. But fate intervened. The mighty armies of the legendary Mongol warrior king Tamerlan attacked eastern Anatolia. War ensued. Bayezid was taken prisoner and died, leaving the very future of the Ottoman Sultanate in question as rival sons fought for the throne. The conquests of Constantinople would have to wait some 50 years when an ambitious new sultan, Mehmed II, came to the throne.
Mehmed's ambition was to gain legitimacy within the Islamic world, to be the one who fulfilled prophecies which are attributed to the Prophet, and to take the Red Apple, the Turks call this city. This has been the most powerful city in the world for 1,000 years, and to give himself legitimacy. His role model was Alexander the Great. He was going to be the Muslim Alexander the Great.
Mehmed's ambitions were lofty, to say the least, but he set about achieving his goal with steely determination. In 1452, less than a year after he'd come to the throne, Mehmed began constructing this fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, a few miles northeast of Constantinople. Now, directly opposite, on the other side of the Bosphorus, there was an earlier Ottoman castle built by Bayezid I when he tried to take the city in 1394. And between them, these two fortifications effectively gave Mehmed control of all sea traffic passing up and down the Bosphorus, thereby denying Constantinople reinforcements and supplies. He had the city by the throat.
The other thing he does is that he's the first Ottoman Sultan to construct a fleet. And he built a fleet of about 25 ships at Gallipoli, and these appear outside the walls of the city, and these completely stun the defenders.
But Mehmed had another trick up his sleeve, a secret weapon he had specially commissioned to bring Constantinople to its knees. It was a new super cannon, larger and more powerful than anything seen before.
The iconic weapon brought to the walls was an enormous cannon, big enough for a man to climb inside, which he had created at his capital, Edirne. There was a great PR thing around this, really. He had it hauled outside the city walls of Edirne. He had the cannon loaded and fired, and the huge shot, which weighed about half a ton, shot across the land for about a mile and buried itself in the earth. And he made sure the news of the coming of this cannon preceded it, so that it was a psychological weapon as well as actually a weapon of war.
With Constantinople's sea approaches sealed off, Mehmed surrounded the landward sides of the city with a force of over 100,000 men and an enormous range of artillery. Constantinople's legendary walls had withstood numerous sieges in the past, but this was a new kind of threat, of a size and capability never seen before. As the guns began to fire from all directions, it became abundantly clear Constantinople was doomed.
The scale of this thing, the size of the army along a 4-mile front, cannons dug in all the way along, the banners, the tents, the huge numbers of people and animals, the call to prayer, the nighttime chanting, particularly as they approached the final attack, the line of fires ringing the front line all the way across this 4-mile front. It certainly frightened the Byzantine defenders. They thought the end of the world had come.
Mehmed's forces relentlessly bombarded the city for nearly 2 months, until on May the 29th, 1453, he ordered a full-scale assault. Ottoman troops surged, overwhelming the defenders and breaking into the city, where they sacked and burned everything in sight. Constantinople, the symbolic heart of Eastern Christendom for over a millennium, had fallen.
It was almost like the beginning of the end of days. What did it mean? What would happen? Would this mean the final triumph of Islam, which were followed by the Day of Judgment?
It was, if one can make a crude analogy, a 9/11 moment. People can remember where they were when they heard the news. People wept in the streets of Rome because this city had been there for so long. It had been there for 1,300 years, and it was one of the fixed realities of the world. Even as far away as England and Sweden, people were appalled by this alien presence coming into the European arena and destroying what seemed like one of the cornerstones of Christendom.
For the Muslim world, the fall of Rome, Eastern Rome, Constantinople, the bastion of Christianity against Muslim expansion, was hugely significant, because this catapulted the Ottoman state into the center of the perception of the Islamic world. All of a sudden, this sort of nouveau bunch of characters suddenly become the center of power, center of cultural perceptions in the Middle East. This was really, really profound.
In little more than 150 years, the Ottomans had emerged from a rabble of nomadic warriors to become one of the great powers of the day. Now the empire would enter into a golden age, a flowering of cultural and artistic achievements. But the Ottomans were not about to put away their sword. As self-styled defenders of the Muslim faith, their rapidly expanding frontiers ran smack into the eastern borders of Christendom. Christian Europe, both fascinated and fearful, braced itself for a titanic struggle with an implacable foe. Part 2 of Ottomans versus Christians, we follow the Ottoman campaign into the heart of Europe and the Great Siege of Vienna.